Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Chair, the Opposition does not support these amendments. The amendments seek to remove the provisions in the bill that limit the capacity of the ICAC to make corruption findings only in circumstances where there is serious corrupt conduct. And they've described that as a handcuff. The Opposition does not agree because although it is a limitation on the power of the ICAC as to how it can describe its findings, it's not such a big change as might first be imagined. Section 12 capital A of the ICAC Act states that in exercising its functions, the Commission is, as far as practicable, to direct its attention to serious corrupt conduct and systemic corrupt conduct, and is to take into account the responsibility and role of other public authorities and public officials have in the prevention of corrupt conduct. So we can see that the institution is already presently charged with focusing on serious corrupt conduct. However, that provision is aspirational. It goes to its judgment. What the provisions of this bill now do is to make it, as it were, enforceable by limiting the circumstances in which it can make findings of corruption against persons and describe it in that way. But if you look at page 7, subclause 15, subsection 2, as the Minister indicated, the Commission isn't precluded from investigating allegations, even if the circumstances are not such that they can be described as serious corrupt conduct. The ICAC can still make findings. For example, conduct fell short of the standards that would be expected of public officials or those charged with public responsibility. It just can't call them corruption findings. It reserves corruption findings for cases that are serious. What's the flip side? The flip side, if this restriction was not there, we would think it would be okay for the ICAC to make findings of corruption in cases that are trivial and unimportant. That can't be right. So we don't have a problem with the restriction to corruption findings in cases said to be serious, quote unquote. Now, we do accept there is an imprecision in the term. It's an ordinary English word, and it will have a meaning that is susceptible to interpretation. But at some point, you have to trust the officials charged with conducting these important public duties, and where there is a real dispute, yes, it will end up in the court. It's refreshing, of course, to have a government that's quite willing to trust the courts with these things. It's an interesting experience. But the serious point though, is that well, I'll just take one example. If you look at the savings and transitional provisions, there is an explicit preservation and referral of the Spicer and Credo matters. They are taken to have been referred by the Electoral Commission to the ICAC, because we know that the ICAC is already seized with these matters. But if we're talking about, for example, a deliberate gaming or breaching or undermining of the integrity of, for example, our electoral laws, if in some inquiry such findings are made, that would of course have to be a serious matter going to the integrity of the electoral process. Such matters couldn't be trivial. If we're talking about an oversight, a receipt not properly accounted for, something incidental, that's one thing. But where you have systematic or organised breaches or getting around the electoral laws, even if the amount of money is relatively small, that would always be a serious matter, because we're talking about the machinery by which our representative democracy chooses its representatives, and that of course would always be a serious matter. So I don't think we need to be concerned that the insertion of the word serious is creating uncertainty to the point where the institution will not be able to discharge its duties properly, or and also that it's restricting the circumstances in which it does its work to areas of only the worst case. Serious does not set the bar so high as to be unreasonable, or looking back across the history of the Commission to lead the casual observer to go, oh well, This new terminology would, of course, wipe out a significant proportion of past investigations, as, of course, the High Court's ruling in the Caneen matter would have done so. I don't believe that applies here, and because of that, we do not cavil with this part of the bill, and we do not support the Green amendments. We do note that this is also consistent with the recommendations of the panel constituted by the former Chief Justice of this state, the former Chief Justice of this nation, and of course a well-regarded senior counsel who conducted the statutory review of this legislation a decade ago. Parliaments, of course, could always agree to disagree and form their own judgment, but on this occasion, given the rationale as spelt out in the panel's recommendations, the opposition does not seek to depart from those recommendations as embodied in this bill. We think the balance is right. Obviously, if there is a problem or a difficulty, the Parliament can attend to the matter again if need be, but we think this is balanced, we think this is appropriate, and we don't think it will lead to the mischief identified by the mover of the amendments. And so we will not be supporting these amendments. We'll be supporting the bill as is.